At 6:10 in the evening my phone rang while I was wiping Ellie's dinner off her chin and pretending the fridge light was enough warmth for both of us. The catering dispatcher needed a last-minute server for a Manhattan fundraiser, cash at the end of the night. I opened my bank app with one thumb and saw $1.05, like the universe was laughing. Ellie's inhaler refill was due, and her school had sent another note about a fee I'd been dodging. I said yes before fear could speak. Hunger made the choice, and motherhood made it permanent today. Tessa Monroe arrived with her hair still damp from a shower, acting like babysitting at short notice was normal. I kissed Ellie's forehead, checked the inhaler in her backpack, and promised myself I'd be home before she woke up. On the subway from Queens I counted stops the way I used to count paint tubes, each one a small cost. My borrowed heels pinched, my uniform smelled like bleach, and my stomach stayed quiet in that dangerous way it does when it gives up. Outside, Manhattan glittered like a locked door. I told myself I was passing through, not begging. The fundraiser was inside a private gallery off Fifth Avenue, all glass doors and soft music that never broke into a real song. The air smelled like orchids and expensive alcohol, like someone had bottled comfort. A chandelier hung above the room like a crown, and I kept thinking it probably cost more than my rent for a year. People floated in satin and tailored suits, laughing with their mouths while their eyes did math. I moved between them with a tray, a ghost in black, trained to apologize without being noticed. Invisible is safer, until it isn't for me. I had been on my feet since early morning, but the shift felt longer because my body knew I was running on fumes. I'd eaten half a bagel at dawn, saving the other half for Ellie, and coffee had lied to me for hours. The service smile stuck to my face like glue. Every time I passed a table piled with food, my stomach clenched hard enough to hurt, then went flat again. I didn't want their leftovers. I wanted the kind of life where dinner isn't a decision. I kept whispering numbers in my head: rent, daycare, MetroCard, paint. Near the bar, a woman in diamonds snapped her fingers toward me without meeting my eyes, like I was a remote control. A man brushed past, shoulder first, and didn't even glance back when my tray wobbled. I caught myself apologizing anyway, reflexive, practiced, familiar as breathing. That's the part that made me angry, not them. I had trained myself to shrink because shrinking kept the peace. I thought about Ellie, and the way she looks up at me like I'm solid. I wanted to be solid here too. But the room kept reminding me I was replaceable, just a blur. Somewhere between refilling champagne and dodging elbows, my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. I told myself not to look, then did anyway, because mothers don't get that luxury. Tessa's message was short and sharp. Ellie had coughed during bedtime stories, the inhaler counter was almost empty, and the pharmacy wanted payment before they'd release the refill. My pulse jumped so fast, my vision sparkled at the edges. I pictured Ellie's small chest, the wheeze she tries to hide so she won't scare me. I swallowed hard and kept walking, like that could fix it. The floor tilted under me. I tried to calculate how long it would take to earn enough tonight, how quickly I could get to a 24-hour pharmacy, how many breaths I could hold before panic showed on my face. My hands trembled as I lifted another tray. The overhead lights blurred into halos. I braced myself against a marble column and told my body we could fall later. 2 more hours, then cash, then the subway, then Ellie. People laughed a foot from me, safe inside their bubbles. I wasn't jealous of their money in that moment. I was jealous of their certainty. At 9:40 at night a guest turned too quickly and knocked my elbow. The tray shifted, and I saw it in slow motion, crystal flutes tipping, tiny bites sliding, my fingers reaching for balance that wasn't there. Heat flooded my face before the crash landed. Then the sound came, sharp and humiliating, glass exploding on marble. My knees buckled. The room narrowed into a tunnel of light and laughter fading into water. I had a split second to think of Ellie and the refill, and then the floor rose to meet me. I was wearing my service smile inside. Arms caught me before my head hit stone. Strong, steady, smelling of cologne and night air, the way a storm smells before it breaks. My cheek pressed to fine fabric, and beneath it a heartbeat refused to panic with me. When my eyes fluttered open, I saw him. Dominic Vale wasn't famous like actors. He was infamous in the way people lower their voices. Dark hair, silver at the temples, eyes that assessed without apology. Around us, the crowd shifted, staff rushing, guests retreating, as if one invisible order had been given. In his grip, my life began to change. I came back in fragments, first the smell of shattered champagne, then the cold bite of marble under my shoes, then the steady wall of Dominic Vale's chest against my cheek. The crowd went quiet, not worried for me, just watching what he would do next, whether I deserved it. His arms shifted like a decision. He lifted me, not as a rescue but as a removal, and people parted without being asked. A tuxedoed man started to protest, then swallowed his words when Dominic glanced his way. Even the caterer manager suddenly remembered my name as if it mattered. By about 10 at night I was in a corridor that smelled of wood instead of spilled liquor. Dominic pushed open a door into a lounge that whispered old money. Leather chairs. Dim lamps. A silence that felt owned. He set me on a sofa, careful, then stood guard outside. My hands shook so hard I couldn't pretend anymore. He pressed a glass of water into them, and the cold steadied my tongue. All I could think about was Ellie Carter asleep in Queens, her inhaler counter blinking close to empty, and me here, collapsing where no one does ever. I pictured the broken glasses and the manager's face, already deciding I wouldn't get paid. That thought should have been small next to my health, yet it clawed at me. Hunger teaches you to fear waste. Every dollar has a job. Tonight my body quit before my pride did first. Dominic didn't raise his voice, but the room moved as if it had. Someone was sent for towels, someone else for security, and at 10:05 he made a call that sounded like an order wrapped in politeness. I realized no one around him decided anything, they simply executed. He watched me the way people watch a fire, alert for spread. There was no softness in him, but there was focus, and it landed on my stocking and paint stains like evidence. I waited for the price to appear. Instead he looked irritated, as if my collapse offended him. Dr. Naomi Hensley arrived with a bag and a kind of calm that doesn't waste words. She wrapped a cuff around my arm, checked my pulse, shined a light near my eyes. Her expression said my body was running on fuel. Dehydration. Low blood sugar. Exhaustion that had turned dangerous. I tried to explain it away in my head. I wasn't sick, just tired. But tired is a luxury word when you are a mother. I skipped meals so Ellie could eat. I stretched everything until it snapped. Dr. Hensley handed me an energy bar and watched me carefully too. Dominic stayed near the window, giving me space without leaving. I felt him listening. When Dr. Hensley asked when I last ate, I admitted it had been early morning, and it sounded like a confession. Dominic's jaw tightened. He wasn't disgusted. He was angry, as if starvation insulted him personally. I wanted to stand and walk out, to prove I didn't need anyone. Pride is my possession, the thing Jordan could never take. But my knees trembled. I thought of daycare and the inhaler counter, and I hated myself for needing help. I hated the world for making need shameful. Dominic's eyes dropped to my hands. Paint lived under my nails like truth I couldn't scrub away. I wasn't only a server, I painted after Ellie slept, in a corner that smelled of turpentine and bedtime shampoo. Showing him my work felt dangerous, but my phone was in my palm. I scrolled through photos with a thumb that wouldn't stop trembling. Dark canvases. A child's silhouette beside a cold window. Hands reaching toward a light that never arrived. I painted what I knew: scarcity, waiting, wanting. Dominic studied the screen with the concentration he had used to hold me upright. When he handed my phone back, his expression didn't soften, it sharpened. I understood his decision before I understood my reaction. He wanted 3 paintings and he named the number like paperwork: $60,000 total, $20,000 each. My brain rejected it the way my stomach rejects richness after cheap food alone. The room spun again, not from fainting, from possibility. $60,000 meant inhalers without panic, groceries without shame, and a sitter paid on time. It also meant Dominic Vale could rewrite my life with one decision. Men like him didn't spend without control. So what part of me was he claiming? Dr. Hensley packed up, leaving me water, a reminder to eat, and a look that said she'd seen this too often. Dominic spoke to staff beyond the door, calm and absolute. I caught the meaning anyway. I wasn't returning to the ballroom. My shift was over. A car was coming. As he lifted me, the building exhaled, relieved I was his now. My cheek brushed his jacket. Everyone treated me like his problem to solve. I held my phone to my chest, $60,000 echoing in my skull. I didn't know what Dominic wanted. I knew he was taking me backstage. By the time the car slid under the hotel awning, my body had stopped trembling and started aching. The city rushed past the tinted windows like I was watching someone else's life. Dominic didn't ride with me, but his control did. The driver knew my name, the doorman waved us through, and nobody asked for a card. At 11:20 at night, I stood at a marble desk with my hair half fallen out, while a concierge nodded as if I checked into places like this every day. An elevator carried me up in silence, soft music leaking through hidden speakers. The carpet swallowed my footsteps, and the hallway smelled like clean linen and money. When I opened the door, the room hit me like bright air, floor-to-ceiling windows, a bed wider than my old couch, a bathroom with stone counters that looked colder than winter. The quiet was so perfect it felt accusing, like it expected me to behave better than I knew how. I set my bag down carefully, as if noise might break the spell. I should have been grateful first, but my first instinct was to inventory exits. Then there was a knock and a cart rolled in without questions, as if the building already knew what I needed. Soup that smelled like garlic, bread still warm, a plate of pasta, fruit cut into neat slices. I ate slowly, almost mechanically, because my stomach didn't trust abundance. The first spoonful warmed my throat and made my eyes sting. The second made my hands stop shaking. By the time I reached the bread, my body remembered it was allowed to live, and the relief felt too big for my ribs. After I ate, I showered until the water stopped feeling like a miracle. The soap smelled like citrus and something floral, too clean for my life. I wrapped myself in a robe that was softer than anything in my closet and stared at my stained dress hanging on the bathroom door, drying in the warm air. My phone buzzed again and my heart jumped, because every vibration had become a threat. I checked in with Tessa, who told me Ellie had fallen asleep clutching her stuffed rabbit, breathing steady for now. I exhaled so hard my shoulders hurt. That should have been enough peace for one night, but my mind kept circling Dominic Vale like a bruise you can't stop touching. Nobody with his kind of gravity catches a woman like me and walks away empty-handed. I tried to picture the strings, because strings are familiar. A favor owed. A phone call later. A quiet reminder that I had been helpless in his arms. And Ellie, always Ellie, because anything attached to me could land on her. Jordan had taught me that. He could turn kindness into proof of weakness with a single sentence. I watched the city lights below the window and felt the room turn from sanctuary to cage. At 12:40 in the morning I sat on the edge of the bed with my phone glowing in the dark and did what I always do when I'm scared, I researched. Dominic's face filled the screen in polished photos, always in control, always beside people who looked untouchable. Headlines called him a developer, a philanthropist, a man who bought buildings the way others buy coffee. Underneath were rumors stacked like shadow, whispers about crews, about debts collected in silence, about men who disappeared after crossing him. I scrolled until my thumb cramped. My bank app still said $1.05, and the contrast made me dizzy again. If he wanted something, what could I even offer? I thought about grabbing my bag and running, disappearing back into Queens before sunrise. But then I pictured Ellie's face when I told her we could buy groceries without counting coins, and the idea of throwing that away felt like cruelty. I wasn't chasing luxury. I was chasing breathing room. Still, breathing room can be used as a leash. I imagined a judge someday asking how I paid for things, who helped me, why a man like Dominic Vale noticed me. my stomach turned. I checked the time, then checked Ellie's photo on my lock screen, and whispered a promise to stay smart. Near 1 in the morning, my phone lit up with a new number and the kind of message that didn't ask permission. Grace Lynn introduced herself in clean, professional language and laid out tomorrow like a schedule I had already agreed to: a meeting in the morning to discuss the 3 paintings, to confirm details, to make arrangements. No warmth, no flirtation, just inevitability. I stared at the screen until it dimmed, realizing this was no longer a strange night. It was a contract-shaped future approaching fast, and I was standing in front of it in a hotel robe. Sleep came in waves. I lay on crisp sheets, listening to the elevator hum and the sirens far below. Tomorrow wouldn't be survival. Tomorrow would be signatures, consequences, and whatever Dominic Vale expected from my yes. Morning came like a bill slid under the door. I woke in crisp sheets that still didn't feel like mine, and for a second I forgot where I was. Then my phone lit up with Tessa's update that Ellie had eaten cereal, that her breathing was steady, and that she kept asking when I'd be home. Relief spread first, then guilt followed heavy as wet paint. I washed my dress again in the sink, rubbed at a stain that wouldn't leave, and tried to make myself look normal. Normal people didn't faint at galas and wake up in hotels paid for by men like Dominic Vale. Normal people didn't have $1.05 in their bank account the night before. I kept repeating that number like a spell, afraid if I stopped the whole thing would vanish. At 10 a.m. a knock came with the same certainty as an appointment at a courthouse. Grace Lynn stepped in with a slim portfolio and the calm face of someone who never wastes motion. She laid papers on the desk and guided me through them with professional patience, and I noticed how every clause protected me more than it trapped me. The deal was simple. Dominic would purchase 3 original canvases, $20,000 each, $60,000 total. I kept the rights. He owned the physical works. No hidden promises, no future leash in legal language. My hand shook when I signed anyway, because paper doesn't erase power. Grace confirmed that a courier would collect the paintings from my Queens apartment on Friday at 9 a.m., and my stomach flipped at the thought of strangers handling the only things I'd made that felt honest. She asked for my account information as if this happened every day, as if a broke single mom didn't have to breathe through panic just to type routing numbers. When she left, the room felt louder without her steadiness. I sat by the window and watched Manhattan move below me, pretending I could read the city's intentions. Every few minutes I refreshed my bank app, expecting the number to stay ugly. At 12:15 the screen changed. $60,000 appeared like a misprint, and my throat closed so fast I had to sit down. I stared until the digits blurred, waiting for them to snap back to reality. They didn't. The money was real, which meant everything else was real too. I moved like I was afraid to wake someone. First I called the pharmacy and paid for Ellie's inhaler refill, then I sent the daycare payment that had been hanging over me like a threat. I paid the school fee, the one that made me avoid opening Ellie's backpack too slowly in the mornings. None of it felt glamorous. It felt like unclenching a fist I'd held for years. I ordered groceries to Queens and added fruit without calculating the cost per bite. When the confirmation email arrived, I cried into my sleeve, embarrassed by my own relief. On the ride back, bags heavy in my hands, I kept imagining the money as a spotlight. A single mom doesn't get to be mysterious, every improvement invites questions. By the time I reached Queens, Ellie ran into me like I'd been gone a week, and I promised myself I'd never let her see me faint again. That promise lasted exactly 1 hour. My phone started lighting up with Jordan's number, the one I'd learned to dread. He hadn't cared about our schedules in months. Now he cared loudly, and the timing told me he'd smelled the change before I'd even unpacked. I didn't answer, but I read the messages anyway, because ignoring him never stopped him. The tone was suddenly concerned, suddenly righteous, full of questions about where Ellie had been last night and why strangers were involved in our lives. He hinted at court the way some people hint at weather, as if it was inevitable and reasonable. I pictured a judge hearing the name Dominic Vale and forming opinions before hearing mine. Fear sharpened into anger. Jordan didn't want Ellie. He wanted control, and money was the handle he'd been waiting for. All afternoon I moved through our apartment like a thief in my own life, putting groceries away, counting inhaler puffs, trying to keep my voice light for Ellie. Inside panic paced. If Jordan filed anything, every bank statement could become evidence. And if anyone discovered Dominic's involvement, the story would write itself without my permission. I told myself the money was payment for paintings, fair and clean, but my body still braced for the moment the favor turned into a demand. Near dusk another message came from Grace Lynn, crisp and unavoidable. Dominic wanted a career dinner tomorrow at 7 p.m., and transportation would be arranged. The invitation looked polite on the surface, yet it felt like a door closing behind me. I stared at it while Ellie colored at the table, and I realized I now had two urgent battles: protect her from Jordan's leverage, and protect my own credibility as I stepped deeper into Dominic Vale's orbit starting tonight. At 6:30 p.m. the car waited outside my building, engine quiet. I kissed Ellie's forehead, checked the inhaler in her backpack, and told myself I was doing this for her, not for the thrill of being invited anywhere. Tessa Monroe arrived to babysit, and I hated how much I needed her. The driver guided us toward Manhattan without a word. I watched Queens fall behind and tried to steady my breathing. I could feel Jordan's name hovering in the background of every thought, like a shadow that wakes up when money appears. I didn't know what Dominic Vale wanted from me, and not knowing felt worse than hunger. The restaurant hid on a side street behind frosted glass. At 7 p.m. I was led past the main room into a private space with a table set for two. Outside, the city kept moving; inside, it felt like time had been scheduled. Dominic was already there, still as a statue until he focused on me. The servers moved with careful precision, and I could tell they weren't afraid of him so much as trained by his gravity. That should have annoyed me. Instead it made my shoulders drop, and I hated that too. I kept my hands folded, paint stains tucked away like a secret. His attention landed on details anyway: my worn shoes, the crease in my dress, the way I scanned exits before I sat. In my mind I translated his calm into something safer: this was business. He bought art. I delivered work. No romance, no rescue, no debt that could be called in later. But the longer we sat there, the harder it was to pretend he saw only product. He watched me like my reactions mattered, like he was curious about the person behind the canvas. That kind of attention can feel like sunlight when you've lived in shade, and it can also burn. I reminded myself that men with power rarely look without taking. My thoughts kept snapping back to Ellie. I pictured her in pajamas, hair wild, sleeping with one hand curled around her stuffed rabbit. Every choice I made had to pass one test: would this make her safer or more exposed? Accepting help could look like instability to a judge. Refusing help could keep us trapped in the cycle that had already pushed me onto a marble floor. Somewhere between plates being cleared and my own nerves settling, I admitted what I'd been too ashamed to say out loud even to myself. I was scared my paintings were good because I made them starving. Desperation had sharpened my eye, given me edges. Comfort might smooth them out. The thought felt ugly, like I was worshipping suffering, but it was real. Dominic treated that fear like a technical problem, not a moral one. He made me feel, without speeches, that discipline outlives panic, that honesty doesn't require pain. I felt my instinct to argue rise just to prove I still belonged to myself. Then he offered a studio as if it was an obvious next step. A real space with proper light, ventilation, and a door that locked. A place where I could work without apologizing to neighbors or painting beside a broken heater. He described it with the same calm he used for everything, as if obstacles were items you remove, not mountains you climb. My pride flared. A studio wasn't only a room, it was evidence. It was a new life that would leave fingerprints, and Jordan would try to smudge them into something ugly. I imagined court papers and strangers judging me by who stood beside me, not what I created. I wanted to refuse on instinct, to keep my autonomy pure, even if purity didn't buy medicine. Dominic didn't push with pressure. He pushed with truth. He let me see, in the tightness around his eyes when hunger came up, that he wasn't offering pity. He knew that kind of empty. He'd lived it, long enough that waste offended him and survival had its own language. He didn't give me a dramatic story, just enough for recognition to click into place. That was the crack. His help still scared me, because comfort can be a leash, but it no longer felt like a hook baited with ego. It felt like someone who remembered what it was to count coins at a register and still dream anyway. When the car brought me back to Queens, Ellie's nightlight glowed in the window like a promise. I stood on the sidewalk with the studio offer sitting in my ribs and realized saying no wouldn't make me free. It would only keep me small. Tomorrow, I would walk into the space he promised, and find out how fast my past could run. At 8:10 in the morning, Dominic Vale met me on a quiet Brooklyn street and walked me to a steel door. The lock clicked, the hallway smelled of fresh paint and concrete, and my heart started believing. I kept thinking of Ellie Carter's lunchbox in my bag all morning. Inside, the studio opened into north lights so clean it felt like truth. Windows ran tall, walls were brick, floors were polished, and a deep sink waited like permission. I imagined setting Ellie's drawings on a table. Then I imagined a judge calling it influence someday in court against me. Dominic moved through the space without boasting, touching nothing, just watching my face. I hated that my shoulders relaxed around him. Safety should not come from strangers. Yet the building had cameras, keycards, and silence. My old apartment had thin locks and louder worries that kept me awake beside Ellie. I told myself this studio was practical, not romantic, but my pulse didn't care. Jordan's name kept flickering in my mind like a warning light. He would twist any gift into a weapon. If I accepted, he would claim I was unstable. If I refused, Ellie would pay either way. Grace Lynn had left a folder at the front desk, month to month, simple terms, my name printed cleanly. Dominic acted like that was all it took, as if paperwork could erase fear. He offered keys, and I held them like glass. I could feel my life shifting under me. After the viewing, I rode back to Queens to pick Ellie up, pretending the studio was just an errand. She chattered about spelling tests while I watched her breathe. Every cough made me tense. I kept my smile steady, but inside I counted risks, headlines, and custody clauses all day. At 2:45 my phone buzzed with a message that felt formal, then another that felt sharper. Jordan had filed for mediation, attaching screenshots of my photo like proof. He wrote about morality and stability, as if Ellie was a prize. My stomach dropped, the studio became evidence overnight. I sat on the edge of Ellie's bed later, listening to her sleep and hating myself for letting my voice shake. I wanted to keep Dominic out of this. Pride is easier than vulnerability. But Jordan's threats weren't about pride. They were about taking my child, quietly, with paperwork alone. Dominic arrived at the studio before I could talk myself out of it, carrying nothing but presents. He saw my red eyes and the way my hands kept checking my phone. He didn't ask for details with softness, he waited with that calm that makes lies feel childish in me. When I finally let the truth out, it came in pieces: Jordan's filing, the screenshots, the implication that a powerful man around me proved I couldn't parent. Saying it made my skin burn. I expected Dominic to withdraw. Instead, his attention sharpened, as if the problem had shown its face. He didn't offer comfort the way people in my world do, with empty reassurance. He offered structure. He spoke in short instructions to someone unseen, and I understood it meant attorneys, timelines, school records, and stability. The speed of it frightened me. He could move pieces I didn't know existed. Relief arrived like a thing I didn't trust. I wanted to grab it and not let go, because Ellie deserved protection that didn't depend on my exhaustion. Part of me felt smaller, as if accepting help proved Jordan right. Dominic's calm proved my pride could not be Ellie's shield anymore. He told me through actions, not speeches, that we would answer Jordan with facts. He wanted daycare receipts, medical records, proof of routine, and a safe address that could withstand scrutiny. I pictured strangers reading my life like a file. Dominic made it sound normal, and that was terrifying today. Before leaving, he placed the keys back into my palm, heavier now. He wasn't asking for gratitude, he was asking for cooperation. I nodded because Ellie's safety outweighed my discomfort, and because I had already stepped into his reach. The lease was month to month, simple, impossible for me still. Alone, I walked the studio again. The light still poured in, but it no longer felt innocent. I pictured Jordan's screenshots beside these windows, and strangers, deciding whether I deserved them. I touched the bare wall where my canvases would hang. The room became a witness, not a refuge anymore. Dominic's solution meant meetings, files, and professionals learning my life. That was the price of protection, and it made me nauseous. I had survived by being unseen, but now invisibility was impossible. Even my paintings private would become testimony. I wondered how many rooms I'd enter before someone judged me. Outside, the city roared like nothing had changed, but I knew it had. Jordan was dragging me backward, Dominic was pulling me forward, and Ellie was the reason I couldn't freeze. I slipped the keys into my pocket. Tomorrow would bring introductions, and I feared being seen more than poor. At 7:30 p.m. the private elevator opened straight into Dominic Vale's penthouse, and I stepped out holding my own breath. The space was all glass and city lights, the kind of view that makes you feel small. People clustered with drinks that looked like jewelry. I looked down at my hands, newly clean but still carrying the memory of paint, and my mind jumped to Ellie Carter asleep in Queens. Every headline, every whisper, could become a custody weapon. I reminded myself I was here for my work, not for him. The first thing I felt wasn't awe. It was heat in my cheeks, the sensation of being scanned. Not stared at like a celebrity, stared at like a question. Who is she? Why is she here? I could feel the answers forming anyway. Charity case. Opportunist. Kept woman. My anger rose, the anger I used to swallow, except now I had nowhere to hide it. Dominic moved through the room like gravity with a suit. People didn't rush him, they adjusted around him, shifting shoulders, lowering voices, making space without being asked. He didn't touch my back, didn't tug my arm, but he positioned himself close enough that I felt protected and displayed at the same time. Was he shielding me from them, or framing me for them? I told myself it didn't matter. Only the paintings mattered. Then I saw how he watched me watch the room, and I hated that he noticed everything. He guided me from cluster to cluster with the calm of someone introducing a deal, and I learned names I wouldn't remember later. Collectors with soft hands. Gallery assistants with hard eyes. Men who smiled like they were buying a horse. Women who measured me with one glance at my dress and a second glance at Dominic. Each time I felt myself shrinking, I pictured Ellie's lunchbox on our counter and forced my spine to stay tall. I didn't come this far to disappear again. Near the window stood Vivian Park, the curator Dominic had mentioned, and she looked nothing like the polished socialites around her. She wore black, simple, like she refused to decorate herself for anyone. Her gaze didn't slide, it landed. When Dominic brought me toward her, my pulse kicked up. This wasn't a party guest. This was a gate. She looked at me the way I look at a blank canvas, deciding whether it's worth the first stroke. I felt oddly grateful for that kind of honesty. At 9:10 Dominic did something that changed the temperature of the room. He drew attention without raising his voice, and suddenly people were listening, not pretending. He framed me as an artist worth knowing, not someday, now. The meaning was clear, he was staking his reputation on my talent. I felt the weight of it settle on my shoulders. A few faces tightened with skepticism. A few brightened with interest. Nobody ignored me anymore. Vivian's eyes narrowed, not unkind, just precise. She asked for my portfolio and a formal meeting, the kind of request that felt like a door cracking open rather than swinging wide. It wasn't a promise. It was a test. My adrenaline flipped into focus. If she wanted to judge me, fine. I could survive judgment. I had survived hunger. I had survived Jordan's threats. I could survive this, too, if my work was as honest as I believed. For a few minutes I almost forgot the rumor layer, Because someone was finally treating my art like the center of the story. Dominic didn't answer for me. He didn't explain me. He stood slightly behind, letting me carry my own voice, and that choice mattered more than any gift he could buy. It made me feel, briefly, like I belonged here on my own terms. Then the flash of a camera stitched reality back together. Not a guest taking a selfie. A lens with intention. Another, near the hallway. A hush ripple, a handler's glance, the subtle choreography of people who know publicity is always lurking around Dominic Vale. I realized the room wasn't only a room. It was a stage, and I had walked onto it without consent. My throat went dry. By standing beside him, I had stepped into a spotlight that doesn't turn off. When the night ended and the elevator doors closed behind me, I felt lifted and hunted at the same time. I had a real path forward with Vivian Park, and a sharper fear curling underneath it. Somewhere out there, someone had my face on a screen already, attaching a story to it. By morning, strangers would decide who I was before my paint ever got a chance to speak. I knew the internet would wake before I did, hungry for meaning. At 7:20 in the morning my phone began screaming while I poured cereal and checked Ellie's inhaler. Notifications stacked like dishes, blurry photos of me near Dominic Vale, captions implying I'd traded myself for access. I stared at the screen, then at my daughter, and felt my stomach drop. Outrage hit first, hot and clean, because none of those strangers knew my rent, my daycare, my nights painting after bedtime. They knew a headline. Group chats rewrote me as a gold digger, a charity project, a warning label. My hands shook as I packed Ellie's backpack for school anyway. Then shame seeped in, slow and sticky, when Jordan texted with sudden concern. He acted like he'd always worried about Ellie's environment, and he hinted that judges love screenshots. He didn't mention my paintings, only Dominic's name and the word stability. I kept my voice soft for Ellie all morning. Tessa Monroe came over with coffee and a face that said she wanted to throw my phone into traffic. She reminded me in her blunt way that women get punished for help and the internet loves simple stories. Her humor kept me from crying, but my chest still felt tight. Ellie asked for strawberries like it was any other day, and I rinsed them while my mind raced. The kitchen smelled like dish soap and school lunch. Outside the city argued on my screen. I wondered what would happen if Ellie heard her mother described like an object someday too. I forced myself to shower, dress, and leave the apartment, because hiding would look worse than rumors. On the subway to Manhattan I rehearsed answers I wasn't allowed to say out loud. Every station felt like a countdown. If Vivian Park dismissed me today, the gossip would become truth permanently. Vivian's gallery was all white walls and quiet confidence, like it didn't need to beg for attention. I arrived early, hands damp, pretending I wasn't shaking. Staff glanced at me with polite curiosity, and I felt the rumor in the air before anyone spoke. My stomach twisted with each step. At 1 p.m. Vivian Park sat opposite me with a folder and the look of someone who hates excuses. She made it clear the art world would assume Dominic Vale bought my seat at the table. She didn't care about my feelings, she cared whether my work could survive narrative. I wanted to defend myself, to list every night I'd skipped dinner so Ellie could eat, but I swallowed it. Vivian's point was brutal and practical: perception becomes policy. If a judge or critic believed the rumor, my talent wouldn't matter. I felt protective rage harden into focus right then. Then she surprised me. She said my paintings were strong enough to justify a risk, and she floated a group show built around transformation. It wasn't a rescue, it was a test with teeth. She warned the scandal would bring crowds who came to judge first and buy if convinced. Walking out onto the sidewalk, I felt hollow and furious. The opportunity was real, which meant the pressure was real. I couldn't do this for Dominic's approval, or to spite strangers. I had to do it for Ellie, for custody, for my own name before the rumor wrote our future. My phone buzzed again, and Jordan's tone had shifted from hinting to asserting. He referenced mediation times, asked where I'd been last night, and implied Ellie was at risk around powerful men. I could almost see him drafting accusations like weapons. I didn't answer. I saved everything for my lawyer. Tessa met me after school pickup and helped me keep my face steady. She reminded me that the best revenge is receipts, routines, and work you can't fake. I watched Ellie swing her backpack, unaware, and I promised myself I would not let adult cruelty touch her skin ever again. That night, after Ellie fell asleep, I opened my sketchbook and realized the next enemy wasn't Jordan or the internet. It was my own fear. I had to paint something undeniable, something that didn't beg to be liked. Pressure would either freeze my hands or force a new voice out. Dominic Vale texted a short check-in that I read without replying, because even kindness felt dangerous now. I couldn't let him fight this battle for me. If I survived, it had to be with paint, not protection. I laid out brushes like weapons and waited for courage to arrive. In the quiet, I replayed every label people had thrown at me. I pictured Vivian's cool eyes, Jordan's smug certainty, and Ellie's trusting face. The studio keys on my counter felt heavier than cash. They meant possibility, and they meant evidence. I realized tomorrow would demand work, not explanations only. Before sleep, I set a deadline in my head and cleared the table for sketches. The internet had decided my story in one morning. Now I had to decide what my hands would say back. I turned off my phone, stared at the blank page, and felt it staring back. By the end of that week, I stopped reading the comments, not because they went away, but because Ellie needed breakfast more than I needed proof that strangers were cruel. I told myself the show would be my answer. Then I walked into the studio and realized I had been trying to paint a courtroom defense, not a painting. Mornings became a tight loop: inhaler check, lunchbox, hair brushed, a kiss at the school gate, then me on the train with coffee that tasted like panic. I carried sketches in my bag and stared at them between stops, hearing Vivian Park's warning in my head. If I failed, the rumor would become my permanent biography, and Ellie would inherit it like debt. At the studio, the light was steady, but my mind was not. I stretched canvas after canvas, primed them, and froze. Every first mark felt like it would be judged by a jury I could not see. I painted a careful figure, hated it, scraped it off. I tried abstraction, then kept smoothing it until it looked harmless. Dominic Vale didn't hover, but he appeared like clockwork. Sometimes he sat near the window, phone silent, letting the room hold 2 heartbeats instead of 1. Sometimes he left groceries by the sink without comment, as if feeding me was part of keeping the paint moving. His steadiness irritated me because it highlighted my chaos. I kept starting over. I sketched faces, erased them, then sketched hands because hands felt safer than eyes. I mixed colors until they matched what I thought buyers wanted, then hated myself for thinking about buyers at all. Dominic's quiet check-ins arrived like a metronome, and when he visited he made space without asking, moving my chair closer to the light, setting my water within reach. It should have helped. Instead, it reminded me that I was being invested in, and investment comes with expectations too. Days blurred between school drop-offs and studio nights. I kept Ellie's inhaler stocked and answered lawyer emails with paint on my fingertips, while Jordan pushed mediation dates like a thread I could hear even when my phone was silent. By 10:30 at night I was alone in the studio, the city outside dark, the floor cold through my socks. I had 3 canvases lined up and nothing on them except faint pencil ghosts. I stared until my eyes burned, then I started painting anyway, furious strokes meant to prove I could. The result looked like a performance of suffering, not the thing itself. I sat on the concrete and put my head in my hands. When I stood to clean my brushes, I noticed the smell first, sharp and wrong. One of my paint jars had been switched. The pigment separated in oily streaks, unusable. Then I saw the canvas in the corner, the one I had finally liked yesterday. A thin cut ran across it, shallow but deliberate, like someone wanted to remind me how easy it was to ruin what I made. This wasn't the internet anymore. This was physical. I checked the door, the lock, the hallway camera. Nothing obvious. My mind chased a culprit anyway, but all it caught was the fact that someone had access. I was new to this building and new to being worth sabotaging. Dominic arrived before midnight, as if my panic had a signal. I didn't explain much, I didn't have to. He saw the sliced canvas and the ruined jar and the way my hands wouldn't stop shaking. His expression went still. He made a few calls, short and controlled, and I understood he was tightening security and pulling footage. I should have felt safe. Instead, I felt exposed. Protection meant admitting I needed it, and proof that I was now part of Dominic Vale's world, where people didn't just talk, they interfered. I hated how quickly my life had become a target. I hated how much relief I felt when he took control. After he left, the studio was quieter, but my chest still buzzed. I stared at the damaged canvas and realized I had been painting for strangers who would never be satisfied. I wiped the slate clean, took a fresh canvas, and decided to paint the only thing I could defend, what it felt like to be seen and terrified at the same time. At 1:10 in the morning the first honest mark landed, messy and alive. I painted fast, not careful. A figure at a threshold. A child's small hand in the corner, not as decoration, as gravity. Light that looked like promise and threat in the same color. I didn't correct myself. When I finally stepped back, my arms ached and my eyes were swollen, but the painting felt real. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't safe. It was mine. Whatever happened next, this existed now. The next fight would not be in my head or my studio. It would be on a gallery wall, under bright lights, in front of strangers who would decide whether my truth was worth believing. At 9 a.m. I walked into Vivian Park's gallery before the city fully woke, and the silence felt sharper than any review. White walls, polished concrete, and the faint smell of fresh paint made my stomach flip. Gloves, measuring tape, and clipboards moved around me like quiet machinery. My canvases waited in bubble wrap, suddenly small, suddenly fragile, like secrets being carried into court. I kept thinking about Ellie's breakfast and whether she would miss me at pickup. I breathed through dry mouth and reminded myself, today the work becomes real. I promised my hands they would not shake forever. Handlers lifted each frame with care, turning my paintings into objects with labels instead of late-night confessions. Under the gallery lights my darkest colors looked deeper, and my brush marks looked like fingerprints. Vivian walked the line of walls, stepping back, tilting her head, moving one piece a few inches as if it mattered. When she stopped at my threshold painting, the room seemed to hold its breath. She chose it for the anchor wall, the spot everyone would see first, and my knees went weak. Pride arrived quietly, followed by fear. Now I had no place to hide. By afternoon the installation was finished, and I left the gallery with paint under my nails and a new kind of exhaustion in my bones. I picked Ellie up, listened to her stories, and pretended my heart was not racing toward tomorrow. At home I laid out clothes, then changed my mind 3 times, because nothing ever feels right when you are being watched. I packed Ellie's inhaler, signed her school folder, and asked Tessa to babysit again. Success still required logistics. When Ellie finally slept, I stared at the ceiling and practiced breathing like it was a skill alone. At 7 p.m. the doors opened and the gallery filled with perfume, wine, and opinions. Shoes whispered on concrete, and every laugh sounded slightly too loud. People paused in front of my work as if they were tasting it, then glanced at me to decide what it meant. I felt my throat tighten, the same way it did when Jordan threatened court, because judgment is judgment no matter the room. Vivian moved through the crowd like a blade, calm and alert. I kept my hands folded, my posture steady, and my eyes on the paintings, not the faces watching quietly. Dominic arrived later, and the room shifted before I even saw him. A few collectors moved closer, not because they cared about my brushwork, but because his presence implied value. That used to make me furious. Tonight it made me strategic. He greeted Vivian, nodded to me, and then stepped back, letting me stand alone in front of the wall that carried my name. I realized support can be loud or it can be disciplined. He stayed near the edge of the crowd, a point in my vision, while I faced questions with a dry mouth and a steady voice. I kept expecting the first buyer to walk away after learning I was a single mom from Queens. Instead, at 9:45, I heard a small, unmistakable sound near my painting, a sticker pressed onto the wall label. The red dot looked absurdly tiny and impossibly loud. My lungs forgot how to work. I stared at it until tears blurred the white space around it, then forced myself to inhale slowly, the way I taught Ellie during asthma flare-ups. Another guest leaned closer to the canvas, not to judge, but to imagine it in their home. Hands steadied. Momentum did not feel like fireworks, it felt like people lingering, asking for my story, then looking embarrassed when they realized I was not a shortcut. Vivian's assistant placed another dot beside a second piece, and a third label became reserved, the word written neatly in pencil. Each mark was proof and pressure at once. Dominic still did not speak for me, but I caught his gaze once, and the approval there was quieter than applause. I texted Tessa to check on Ellie, then tucked my phone away, reminding myself I was allowed to exist in this room without apologizing. When the night thinned, I stood in front of the anchor wall and read my name on the placard like it belonged to someone braver. Outside, flashes popped from the street, reminding me the victory carried a shadow. Sales meant attention, and attention meant opinions that could reach Jordan's hands. Dominic walked me to the elevator without claiming me, only staying close enough that I could borrow steadiness. On the ride down, I felt taller and more fragile. Tonight proved my talent to strangers. Tomorrow, critics and feeds would decide the story, and I would have to live inside it. At 6:50 in the morning I lay awake with my phone glowing against the pillow, scrolling through reviews like they were lab results. Some called my work raw and brave. Others hinted I was a pretty accident financed by Dominic Vale. The praise landed strangely, like applause heard underwater. The criticism hit harder than it should have, because it sounded like Jordan's voice dressed up as culture. I kept refreshing anyway, chasing certainty I never get. My stomach nodded, not from hunger this time, but from being seen too loudly. In the dark, I wondered who would read it. By the time Ellie padded into my room, the comments had turned into threads, and threads into theories. Strangers debated whether a single mom could be talented without a rich man behind her. Jordan's latest message sat unread, but I felt it anyway, that legal, righteous tone he uses when he wants control. I pictured a mediator scanning a blog post and deciding I was reckless. I pictured Ellie's name in a filing. Success didn't erase danger, it advertised me. I deleted apps, then reinstalled them, trapped between denial and vigilance. Even my quiet mornings now felt like public property. I made oatmeal, cut fruit, and pretended my hands weren't shaking. Ellie talked about her spelling quiz and asked if we could paint together later, like the world hadn't shifted overnight. I nodded, because mothers can't fall apart on schedule. At the school gate I watched her disappear into the building and forced my lungs to slow. Whatever people wrote, Ellie needed consistency, pickup times, medicine refills, bedtime stories. Fame doesn't replace responsibility, it stacks more weight on it. On the train back, I decided I would treat my career like parenting, steady, boring, and unbreakable. Shortcuts, no apologies, ever. Dominic checked in without drama, as if my panic was another line item he refused to ignore. I hated how my body relaxed at his attention. He could make a problem disappear with one call, and that fact lived beside my heartbeat like a loaded question. I had fought for every inch of my life, and now a man I barely knew could bulldoze it or protect it with the same calm. Comfort and terror started wearing the same face. I pictured Jordan in court and Dominic's lawyers beside me. Truth steadied me today. Later that morning Dominic sent details about an apartment in a quieter neighborhood, close to Ellie's school and my studio route. He framed it as a step I had earned, not a favor, and insisted it was market rate, around $2,500 a month. The number should have thrilled me, but it scared me more than a bill ever had. A safer building meant cameras and doormen and fewer late-night footsteps, yet it also meant questions about who I belonged to. I stared at the listing until my eyes burned. If I accepted it, I needed it to be mine. I ran the math like I always do, not because I distrust numbers, but because I distrust people. My paintings had sold, and Vivian hinted commissions might come, so paying rent myself was not impossible. Still, I wanted boundaries written into my bones. I would keep the studio no matter what. I would keep my own bank account and my schedule. Ellie would keep her routines, her friends, her pediatrician. Dominic could help with attorneys and paperwork, but I could not let him become the headline that swallowed my identity. I wrote a list and taped it inside my sketchbook. At 12:30 Dominic met me in the studio office with a folder of options and a patience that felt unfamiliar. We talked in the only language we both trusted, specifics. I laid out my fears, the custody optics, the way money can turn into a story that erases a woman. He laid out what he wanted, not ownership, but presence, and he accepted that my yes had to come with rules. I understood, finally, that he wasn't offering to replace my strength. He was offering to stand beside it. Afterward, the room felt less like cage, more like plan. That night I tucked Ellie into bed and watched her breathe until my own chest loosened. Success had not made me fearless, it had given fear new shapes, reputation, permanence, love. I could feel the next wave coming already, more shows, more eyes, more chances for Jordan to twist light into shadow. Still, I chose forward motion. I would paint, parent, and keep building receipts of stability no rumor could erase. Dominic would stay in my orbit, not as a savior, but as a partner I was learning to trust. Someday I would return to the place I fell standing. 1 year later, the first thing I notice when I wake up is silence, not the panicked kind from an empty fridge, but the steady kind that comes from routine's holding. Ellie's inhaler sits in the same kitchen drawer every morning, full, labeled, and boring. I make oatmeal, pack lunch, sign homework folders, and still glance at the clock like the day might collapse, but it doesn't. My studio key hangs beside our apartment key, equal weight, equal claim. Vivian Park's emails now talk about schedules and themes instead of favors, and my bank balance looks normal enough that I don't flinch when I buy fruit. Jordan still tried, of course. He filed motions, sent screenshots, and showed up at mediation with that polished concern that used to make me doubt my own memory. But paperwork is louder than rumors when you keep it clean. Every school pickup was logged. Every doctor visit had receipts. Every apartment lease, every daycare payment, every witness statement from Tessa Monroe and even Grace Lynn piled up into a simple picture. Ellie was safe with me. After months of back and forth, the threats thinned. He didn't become kind, he just ran out of angles. Tonight, at 8 p.m., Dominic takes me back to the gallery where I fell. Not for a spectacle, not for a fundraiser with strangers snapping their fingers, but for a quiet anniversary gathering he arranged with Vivian and a few people who actually know my work. The same chandelier hangs overhead, throwing soft light across the marble, and the scent of champagne still floats in the air. But I am not a ghost in a uniform anymore. I walk in wearing my own coat, my own shoes, my own name on the guest list. Ellie is with Tessa tonight, tucked into bed with her rabbit and a new storybook I bought without checking the price. Before I left, she asked why the place matters, and I told her, in the simplest way, that it's where I learned I deserved help and I could still be strong. Inside the gallery, Vivian nods at me like a colleague, not a gamble. I see my first sold painting on Dominic's wall in a small corner display, and it hits me that the past is no longer chasing, it's behind glass. Dominic stays close, but he doesn't steer me. He watches me breathe, watches me laugh with Vivian's assistant, watches me accept compliments without shrinking. When the room quiets, he draws me aside with that calm that used to scare me and now feels like shelter. He tells me he wants a commission for my next show, not because he needs another painting, but because he wants the beginning captured. The fall. The catch. The moment my life pivoted. He wants it on canvas as proof that rescue can go both ways, that he was hungry for meaning and I was hungry for safety, and somehow we fed each other. Later, when the last guests leave and the staff dim the lights, we stand beneath the chandelier like two people inside a memory. The marble is still cold underfoot, but I'm steady on it now. At 11:59 at night Dominic takes out a small box, and my first instinct is not panic, but clarity. He isn't asking me to give up my studio, my independence, or the rules that keep Ellie safe. He is asking me to choose the life we've been building on purpose, with paperwork and boundaries and real love that doesn't need secrecy. I say yes with tears on my cheeks and my spine straight, because I am not invisible anymore, and because I know what I want. On the ride home, I think about the girl who had $1.05 and paint stains and believed help always came with a hook. I still respect her caution. It kept us alive. But I also respect the part of me that learned to accept support without surrendering myself. Ellie will grow up seeing a mother who works, who protects, who creates, and who can be loved without being owned. That is the real inheritance. I don't know what the next year will bring, but I know this: I can stand in bright rooms now and still come home to bedtime stories for Ellie, always. If you're listening and you've ever felt overlooked, remember this: being seen is scary, but staying unseen costs more. Keep your receipts. Keep your boundaries. Keep making the thing only you can make. And when someone offers you a hand, you're allowed to ask for safety and still say yes. If this story moved you, tap like, share it with someone who needs hope, and drop a comment with your city and a moment you felt truly seen.